Today I'm going to talk about this book, The Seventh Functional Language by French author Laurent Binet. You may have seen my edition on his debut book called HHHH. I think this guy is one of the most significant writers in fiction today. But before we get to the whys and wherefores of that, I'm going to take a preamble, so just bear with me on this. So the first question is, how many French stand-up comedians can you name? And in my case, the answer is none. And I'm sure it's probably the same for you, unless you're French. I can name a German stand-up comedian, but I can't name a French one. And I don't count English comedians like Eddie Izzard who go over to France and do their act in French, because they are still English. So that's the first thing. The second thing is France has no pop culture. So if you go on the London Underground and there's a busker, chances are he's playing his guitar through a practice amp, and he's playing along to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Whereas in France, if you go on the metro, the buskers there are playing cellos or violins, and they've got a music stand with the music, because they have no pop culture. Instead, their pop stars are their academics, their thinkers, their artists, and their writers. And they have lots of programmes on French TV, although I understand these might be in decline, where these guys are talking about ideas in a way you would never see on British TV. And of course, France has the L'Académie Française to protect the French language. You know, they're very, very concerned with sort of their language and its heritage and stuff. But France has no pop culture. But it still has pop stars, just they're not in a pop culture. And the third thing is, when I was at college, I was doing history, as you may recall if you've seen my show on his first book, HHHH. But one of the things we studied was a much more general sort of cultural thing. It was given by a Don who didn't actually have a specialism, but he was just deeply read. So you could write about culture, how that affects history, or even literature and all that sort of stuff. And he made a statement which has always stuck with me, was that the best novels in history have been produced by the English and the Russians, which I think is a little harsh on Proust, but there you go. And also, if he's saying English rather than British, well, they weren't even British, but he's excluding Joyce and Beckett, which I think is definitely mistaken. But there again, I think he was talking about 19th century, the classical age of the novel, so, you know, maybe that accounts for it. And the point is that after the Second World War, that torch has passed from Britain and Russia to the Americans. The Russians are not producing any literature at all, as far as I can see. And if it's a case of, well, it's just not appearing in translation, well, it can't be that, you know, significant if no one's translating it. And the British, unfortunately, it's just, you know, I don't think we're producing any kind of body of significant novels at all. They're individual novels, absolutely, but just we don't have the primacy that my old tutor was claiming for us, and it has absolutely passed to the Americans in the post-war era. You know, from Roth, Burroughs, Don DeLillo, to more recent writers like Jonathan Lethem, Ben Marcus, people like that, Ben Lerner, Paul Auster. You know, you could just reel them off. There's loads of them. So, you know, the 20th century, late 20th century, dominated by American writers. But something strange is happening, and that the French are suddenly muscling in on that sort of dominance of American writers. You've got Houellebecq, and now this guy. Now, he's only written 2 novels, or at least 2 that are in translation, so it might be a bit early to sort of put him in that sort of class. But both novels are just so good that I put him there already. And the French are dealing with big ideas in a way that the British, you know, we've just sort of got more and more fractured down the lines of identity, you know, the rabbit holes of identity. And whereas the French talk about humanity and the big issues facing humanity. And I think that you know, obviously you still have to execute that well in your writing, but I think they are, and I think the French are becoming significant players in the novel again, you know. Okay, so to this book specifically, It's 1980s France. It's on the eve of the election, presidential election between Valéry Giscard, who's a conservative, and Francois Mitterrand, who was a socialist. And a Russian linguist has produced a paper called about what he calls the seventh functional language, which basically posits that if you master this seventh functional language, that you will win every verbal argument that you engage in, that listeners will not be able to resist the power of your arguments. And it's to do with rhetoric and things like that. And the two politicians are very scared that their opponent will get their hands on this document and use it to win the election. That's the premise of the book. The Russian Jakobson, who's a real life linguist, produces this document and hands it over to the real life semiologist and literary critic Roland Barthes in Paris. And Barthes gets killed in a road accident. He's a pedestrian. He gets knocked down by a laundry van. Now, this really happened. That's a true event. But the conceit of this book is that at the time he was in possession of this seventh functional language document, and that it's a murder because they wanted the document. And the book itself is that a sort of grizzled detective is appointed to get the document back, or at least destroy it, make sure it doesn't fall into anybody's hands. But this detective knows he's completely out of his depth, because it's all to do with semiology and, sort of intellectual academia. So he ends up hiring an assistant from academia, a young researcher, who dissects this grizzled cop just from a few signs about things like his wedding ring and how he sits with his back to the wall, completely dissects him, gives him his own history back to him. This really impresses the cop, so he enlists him to help. And of course, there's an interesting thing there that, what do cops do, detectives do? They look for clues. And this is what this young academic has provided him, simply by visual signals about his clothes and things like that. So that's a really interesting section in the book. So they go on this journey trying to recover the document, which means they go on a journey through French academia, letters, writing, philosophers, and there are loads of real-life characters in the book. Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Julia Kristeva, then there's some non-French ones like Umberto Eco and the American philosopher John Searle. And you don't need to know what these people produce, what their theories are and what their writings are to enjoy the book, because it's so skillfully written that it's about the humans behind the theories. So, their professional rivalries, their grudges on a personal level, irrespective of their theories. Those that pay lip service to their theories, those that live their theories, so their life depended on it, and those who are just playing at it, they're dilettantes. And it's hilarious. It's really, really funny. And yet, on the same time, you're getting taken through this. Our society produces all these signs that influence our behaviour, and politics and advertising and all this kind of stuff. Who these French academics and writers, that's what they were studying, and they came up with different theories on it. So you're getting this sort of quite deep, profound stuff about interpreting the world around us, and you're getting this humour every page, And it's, that's a really difficult double act to pull off, a profundity and a huge sort of belly laugh entertainment. And this guy does it effortlessly. It's just superb. And I can't recommend it highly enough because I was just blown away by it. The book HHHH was about history, academic history, and this is about sort of philosophy and literary criticism. So again, it's set in the academic world, but it's very different. It's much more sort of belly laugh than HHH, which was subversive. This is subversive, but in a much more sort of Monty Python foot kind of way. But it's funny, don't get me wrong. I don't think it's crude. It isn't, because as I say, it's profound as well as funny. And that's why, even after 2 books, I put this guy as a really significant writer. Him and Houellebecq are leading the French, sort of renaissance of letters or whatever. Now, Houellebecq is... love him or loathe him, he was writing about big ideas about sort of, Islamic fundamentalism years before anybody else was. Now, you can come down on either side of the argument that he's offensive and all that stuff, but he's dealing with big, important ideas. And as I say, this is what the French do in a way that the British, sadly, don't do. The French are not scared of politics. The French are not scared of thinking about big human themes in a way the British seem to have shied away from. So, absolutely recommend this. Seventh Functional Language. Okay, thank you.